So with that, I would like to pass the time to my counterpart, Mei Wai, in Singapore. Would you like to share with us from a systemic or from a hardware perspective, which half do we keep? So over to you, Mei Wai.
Good evening, everybody. Allow me to share with you today the deeper perspective of organizational change. As many of you would be familiar, globally, organizations are now moving into the next phase of organizational change, be it the second phase or the third phase, continuing to reorganize, restructure, consolidate by closures, complete closures. There have been impacts on commercial offices, manufacturing facilities, and people have been working from home, with many companies also allowing them to do so. Yet pre-COVID, there was already a high failure rate of organizational change ranging from 50 to 80%, where companies actually failed to meet change objectives due to weak change implementations, personnel change, etc. So I'm sure many would be very concerned about organizational change taking place during the pandemic. So today I'll start off with the advice on the fact that organizational change should not be rushed, even in the pandemic, as impulsiveness, speed is the enemy of deep thinking and mindfulness. And today I would like to share also particularly a very useful framework that we are using, and giving credit to Professor Eric Vanderloo, Roger Lehman, and Susan Long. The short form of this framework is known as BART, B-A-R-T. It is a very useful checklist on considerations that companies can take during organizational change to ensure all the efforts that go into designing the organizational change actually end up being implemented by the individuals and the teams. Now, if you are somebody also as an individual coming to our show who is part of a huge organizational change effort, I believe you will also find this a very useful framework. So as I mentioned, BART stands for boundary, authority, role, and task. And I'm going to take you through these 4 areas so that at the end of today's session, you will get an idea on how to make considerations in organizational change that goes in a deeper level. Firstly, B stands for boundary, which is defined by what belongs to the system or the environment. So by considering the difference of boundary change before and after the organizational change, you will find it extremely illuminating for you to take note of these points during the organizational change. Before the organizational change during the pandemic, the old way normally would have been the traditional structure of functions and silos of teams. But the new way would be a shift to the various flatter and more agile matrix structures that take place. Take, for example, a functional restructuring that has been common during the pandemic due to the shutdown of the traveling, etc., included the reviews of global and regional teams, hence impacting the boundaries existing. And let's take, for example, specific to, say, the marketing department, the traditional chief marketing officer role that sits alongside a digital leader or VP and a customer relation management team are all starting to be combined to a single leadership to drive integrated teams with speed on and offline to deliver growth. Excellent customer fulfillment, satisfaction in multi-channels to achieve a smooth omni-channel delivery. Therefore, you can see how important boundary is, as it is critical to set the boundary of roles in organizational change to address the input, throughput, and the output of products and services when you consider which half to keep in the organizational change. Secondly, as I mentioned, BART, A stands for authority, formal or informal power. That's what it means. The old way of authority was formal power, top-down, bureaucratic, even taking into account cultural differences. The organizational change in a new way is expediting the emphasis on the virtual world where informal power like influencing skills, getting buy-in, and through empowering the teams are critical. Hence, we must examine and consider closely how organizational change in structure impacts the authority to deliver the change we want. Thirdly, R. R stands for role, which is defined by what is to be the primary role and experience during this organizational change. Have you been in an organization restructuring whereby the person sitting next to you and yourself have been part of a functional reorganization, and yet what you were doing day in, day out did not really change, or rather, your role did not really change? What had happened then, and is quite common, is that nobody had that conversation with you about what role change would take place to allow the change strategy to be filtered down to you, so you will be very clear about your primary roles and tasks, which I will talk about. So this is something that tends to happen when there's a huge checklist to do in change management and it falls through the cracks. So do remember that if you are a leader of a team and you want to be a good leader during the change management, don't just leave it to your boss, but ask. Do ask for what's going to filter down in your roles so that you take them through not just a superficial job scope, but details into expectations of the change that is required as a change leader. So lastly, I will cover T, which is task. Task is the primary task and best effort of what needs to be produced in change, or what is known as change implementation in short. In organizational change, we must always ensure you and the teams are on task. For instance, as I had mentioned in previous episodes on my change model, there's often a misconception and over-focus on the digital transformation being an outside change area, and it's still taking place because at the start of the project, the primary task was not properly defined without considering the bigger picture that digital transformation is actually a holistic change management that impacts organizational change in many cases. This then results in a lack of having a very good strategy upfront to deliver bespoke digital approaches for the company that addresses unique and complex issues that need to be addressed during the change. So without considering BART, this has actually led to reorganizations of projects getting stuck midway and having to fix or restart, with the industry digital transformation failure rates at 80 to 90%, which did not achieve the objective. So change after change and change fatigue will then take place. Therefore, with my explanation of why BART is so important, this framework BART helps you as a leader or an individual to be clear and to look deeper into organizational change by getting everyone on the same page, filtering down from the top to the bottom what is required, and expressing what they believe the organization's shift outcome should be. Thank you. So with that, I will hand you back to Laura, who will talk to you about organizational change software.
Thank you so much, Mei Wai. Well, indeed, the concept of using a BART sort of framework to understand about change or understand how the organization is functioning has a lot of merits when we look at change from the hardware or systemic perspective. So now what I'm going to try to do is from a human perspective or from a personal perspective, when we experience change or as leaders that we've worked with quite a lot during COVID times, either driving change, experiencing change, or contemplating change, what are the factors that leads us to think that they're the key considerations for a good or an innovative change process? So when we look at the topic today, which half do we keep? I think it is important for us to deep dive in the way that the topic or the question is being phrased. Instead of saying which half do we forgo, we say which half do we keep. So bearing in mind, this is a very different approach to looking at either restructuring or looking at change or looking at how we respond to change. Because if we say which half do we keep, this is an asset-based thinking, meaning we have in mind what our future business would look like. We have in mind what our future strategy would be. And then we look into what we have currently in our portfolio from an asset perspective. What do we need to succeed? Instead, sometimes we see that companies or organizations or leadership teams who are slightly not that apt for change discussions, they will go towards the direction of saying, which half do we forgo? It's more a deficit-based discussion. So what we'd like to address today is an asset-based discussion, meaning in order for us to achieve as a company or an organization the future strategy, what is it that we need from an asset perspective? So that's how we would like to anchor today's question. There has been quite a lot of discussion with regards to change. So one of the pulse checks that I invite you all when you're watching our show and currently contemplating questions that we're sort of inspiring or throwing at everybody is that, have you had a change discussion with your team in the past few months? If the answer is yes, or if the answer is more than once, I think you have a higher chance of succeeding in change, because change requires thought, change requires communication. And in the previous episodes, what we've shared with you is the importance of communication and change. So, but on the other hand, if you said, well, Laura, Mei Wai, we have not yet had a discussion with our team on the change that we want, or we have not sit down and put together a point of view of different stakeholders in our organization, I would highly recommend that you start planning it or doing so. So the first thing is how we define the question. Is it asset-based? Is it deficit-based? The second question that we would like to ask on this notion is that when we look at a change environment, and without any question, we're in a very high change environment currently. And if you look at it, very much like how we look at our investment portfolio, in a high risk, in a high return, low return, we will adjust how our portfolio is being structured in order for us to achieve a certain return of a certain time frame. So I'd like to invite us all to also experiment how we look at our human asset portfolio. Could be in a very similar framework. Previously, we would be looking very much at full-time engagement, full-time employees, and long-term contracts, for instance. But now, more and more often, we're hearing the flourishing of project-based, task-based, function-based, or for newer generations, the proliferation of what we call slashies, meaning you are an individual person, but you plug into different functions or you plug into different projects very easily and without a lot of need to integrate, because you are in that mindset of utilizing yourself as a tool, as an knowledge worker, but not from a long-term full-time employment perspective. So the second question that we invite you to think about is, when we think about which half do we keep, we not only think of the asset that you need, we also think about the type of asset, the engagement, or the having the asset mode or means does that need to change. So imagine if we have those two questions in mind, I would recommend three key considerations when we look at human as an asset or teams as an asset. So the first thing is, when we look at currently in times of change or in times of anticipated change, what are the type of skills that we need? Traditionally, I think it would be safe to say that we treasure specialization, meaning someone who is very specialized in one task, who can do it really well, would be more valued than a generalist. But I think you would agree with me that during this year, a lot of times we would say that, you need to be able to come out, if you're a specialized worker, you need to be able to come out from your skill set and look at the bigger picture, because the way that specialized skill set is being framed, structured, and molded previously no longer work now. Even specialization is different. So if you are a manager or if you're a team leader, look at how you would like to balance the proportion of specialized team members and generalist team members. And oftentimes we see that specialized team workers, if you add in certain training on communication, on empathy, on design thinking, you'll be able to extract that generalist ability out of them. So that's the first thing that I would recommend. And when we look at the human factor, are you looking at specialized workers, or are you looking at generalist workers? What's the balance between the two? The second is in terms of mindset, particularly in a volatile, in VUCA world, we would highly recommend that we look at mindsets that are growth mindsets instead of fixed mindsets. To be familiar with the growth mindset, it would mean constantly looking for ability to do better and to extract what is the situation and to be able to utilize that situation to your benefit. Fixed mindset, typically you hear them saying, this is how it's done, I will not change, or we used to do it this way, why are we changing? But growth mindset people, chances are they will be saying, is there a different way? Is there a different meaning to this? So in times of change, I think the proportion of growth mindset needs to outweigh fixed mindset, at least for a short period of time, because you are in a constantly changing world. So imagine if you're managing your leadership team, do you have sufficient growth mindset people in them? And the third consideration is whether or not we're able to realign interests. And by realigning interests, I would take reference to what we oftentimes refer to the game theory, which is a very rational, strategy-based way of aligning interests of teams. So traditionally or previously, before all these changes or innovations happened, I would guess that your team across all different layers, vertically or horizontally, they should have aligned a certain interest, vision, goal. Hence, your organization is functioning very effectively. But then if you are experiencing change, or if you have had change discussions with your team, chances are that the incentive or the trigger point of doing work out of their own will has changed. Is it a company vision? Does it align with the personal value? Is the purpose of what they're doing very clear and also aligned with the individual, organization, and team value? Because if there is, then you would very much be able to capture the output of a team that is dedicated and that is very willing and aligns with your organizational value. So a quick summary of what I believe is extremely important nowadays. When you redefine your organization or when you're looking at change conversations, try to utilize an asset-based question skill, meaning look at which half you want to keep instead of looking at which half you want to forgo. And the second is, when you're looking at your asset, consider the different types of engagements or the different types of asset portfolio that you're able to put together. And there are quite a lot of change in that area we observe. And on that level, try to look for specialized generalist ratio change. try to look for whether or not there is sufficient growth mindset in your organization, and also try to look for whether or not it is an aligned interest throughout this change. Has anything moved, or has any parts of the puzzle moved? Because you would definitely want an aligned team. And with that, I would like to end my short session and to introduce you to the next video, which highlights, I believe, is a very, very innovative company, the TAL Group. Let's take a look at the video, and in a minute, we'll be introducing you to their CEO, Mr. Roger Lee.
It's been an interesting experience, I think, for all of us. I would say we're fortunate and unfortunate in that we had already adapted to working virtually prior to COVID. We had installed our own video conferencing system across the group 4 years ago to reduce travel and to really work a lot more in person rather than emails or messages, really live video. So we already had the infrastructure set up and we're used to talking to each other over video conferencing. Um, so from that point of view, we were okay. We're used to it. But the big change really happened in March when a lot of our customers and 85% of our export is to the US market. So US economy is a big impact to our business. So in March is really when they started realizing COVID is going to hit the US market. And that's when we, I guess, changed into more of a crisis mode and really deciding what we're going to do. At that time, I think you remember most countries were already locked down. Our headquarters is in Hong Kong, but my family and myself were in Singapore and still are. And my teams were working in their respective countries. So we really had to do everything over video conference and couldn't really get into a room to do anything together. And the first thing we did was look at from April to December this year, what were we expecting for the rest of the year? And the first natural question is ask your customers what's going on, what are they seeing? And our customers said, oh, we'll be down about 15-20%. We'll be shut for 4 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, and then we'll be back in business by May or June. And we got together and we said, through our experience in Asia, in SARS, we don't think it's going to be that quick. So, so we had to unfortunately disregard our customers' forecast, and we decided on our own forecast. And we said, let's be aggressive. Let's plan down 50% capacity from April to December. And that's a big change for us because when we are, we had 25,000 people pre-COVID. We're full every month or 90 to 100% utilization every month. And to plan down 50% is a huge change for us. But I said, let's do that and let's see where we come out. If we're down 50%, what do we have to do? So we took 2 weeks. We went through every single aspect of the business, and we came out with, I think, 4 or 5 major initiatives. The first one was on our manufacturing footprint. Are we going to need to keep so many facilities open in the next 1, 2, 3 years? It's just going to be over by end of the year. And we decided that we will take the opportunity to close one of our countries that we have been in, and that's Malaysia. We've been in Malaysia for over 40 years. The cost of labor has been going up every year. And we decided, instead of waiting 5 more years, where probably we would have done it in 5 years' time, take the actions now. And 5,000 people we had to let go. Fortunately, we were able to find jobs for many of them because many of them are foreign workers. They could not go home. And actually, a lot of companies in Malaysia wanted new labor and couldn't get any. So it was actually a win-win. We transferred a lot of our workers over to other companies in Malaysia. But it was a hard decision after 40 plus years in Malaysia to close down. But that was one thing. So reduce our overall capacity footprint was number one. Number two, I think is what everyone else did, which was we freeze your capital expenditure to conserve cash. We went to Friday, no work Friday, so no paid leave. Even though we actually did work in the end, but we all agreed voluntarily to take it all pay cut from the top to the bottom. We obviously cut a lot of expenses, froze headcount across the whole company. And basically we said, okay, if we do all that, we think we'll be okay. We'll lose a lot of money. We'll lose probably equivalent last 10 years of profit in 1 year, but we will still survive. We tested our bottom line and said with 50% down, we will still survive end of the year and come out okay. And fast forward to today, our forecast, I don't know, you call it fortunate or unfortunate, was pretty accurate. We have been down 50% because our product is much more in the formal range. It's workwear. We were making basically men's workwear. That's what we're known for. And when people are working from home, they don't wear workwear. I mean, I dressed up tonight just for this, but normally I'm in a t-shirt, right, or polo shirt, and that's where everyone is. So people are not buying our products. If we were much more in the t-shirt casual wear, I think our impact would be a lot less. So those were the things that I think were really tangible, easy to measure items that we did. I think that the tougher part that we never really had to worry about were bankruptcies. So customers were filing bankruptcies. We have investments in different brands, and that was in jeopardy. We had to decide whether, for one of our investments, were we going to let the company go bankrupt, lose everything we've put in over the last 5 years, or were we actually going to put more money in to take it into bankruptcy to clean out some debt and come out healthier. So those were things that I've never done before, our team's never done before, but things you have to do and really understand the Chapter 11 process in the US on legally what we can do, cannot do. That was a learning, and I think the other area that was a big learning for us was managing customers' credit risk. Because when times were good, the credit insurance companies were great. They gave you as much, they were insuring all our brands, all our customers' purchase orders. But when times are bad, they cut everything off. It's not like health insurance where you pay 10 years of premium and in the next year you get sick, they still cover you. In our industry, you pay 10 years of credit insurance, and then when they want to cut you off, they cut you off in the year that you need help. So it's been tough. So then we had to ourselves go and become credit insurers and say, which customers are we going to take new purchase orders? Which ones are we not going to take new purchase orders? And really a lot of detail and really testing our skill set where we normally are not credit analysts to do that with whatever information we have available. And I think from that, we've learned a lot and we've managed our risk, and we've been quite tough with some customers that are, in a very tough credit situation because we have to protect our workers too. So those are different areas of things that we've done in the last, since March, I would say.
Well, hearing what you're saying, I mean, it does sound like, you're quite easy talking about it, but then I could imagine the heartbreak and the sleepless nights and the tough decisions. But one point that I would really like to dive slightly deeper in is, you mentioned that you decided not to listen to your customers in terms of forecasts, and turns out you're right. So what is it behind that? Is that intelligence? Is that collaborative knowledge? What is it behind that made you decide, no, that's not going to happen. We're just going to trust ourselves and we're going to do this?
That's a good question. I don't know. I can't tell you. I mean, there was a moment where our teams, we were looking through the numbers and saying, down 15%. By June, they'll be back in business. And we're like, it doesn't sound right, through what we've experienced in SARS in Asia, it just doesn't sound so easy. Because I said, once you go into lockdown, what's the trigger for you to get out of lockdown? And as we've experienced, is the number of new cases, right? And in US, we didn't think that they were going to get out of the number of new cases because there was no lockdown, there's nothing that soon. So in our gut, we're just like, something is wrong. Now, what I learned through that process, and I think that's what we used basically, was there were two types of customers. One type of customer says, I'm going to be down 15% this year. Some said maybe 30%. But another type of customer said, I've tested my bottom line. I know that the bottom line is if I do less than 20%, if I'm down to 20% of my previous level, I'll be out of business, liquidating the business. But if I'm at 21%, I'll still be out. Okay, so you test your bottom line, and when I say 50%, we were testing our bottom line. We were saying 50%, which is really a big number if you think about it. At that time, back in March when you had no forecasts, we really said 50% will be fine. Okay, and I think when you think, I think in this crisis, what I've learned is brands or customers or companies or leaders that saying, "Oh, we'll be over soon," and no one has a crystal ball, as opposed to things that I have tested my bottom line. I know how low I can go. And you know what? I'm not comfortable. I think there's a chance I get that low. Let's do something now. Let's not wait for 3 more months before I decide what to do. Leaders in these times need to be decisive. Because if you're not decisive, you're burning cash every day and leaving you with few options. You want to have as many options as you can. So the longer you drag it on to make a decision, the less options you have over time.
And if I decode your message, is also for leaders to be able to come out to not just sugarcoat the situation, to be able to look at what's real, what do we know, and to be brave enough to say, you know what, this is something I don't know, but that's the bottom line. So if we
Yes.
have leaders like these in the organization, and that would be very much, what I'm hearing from the TAL group is that, you have the experience of SARS in this part of the world. You look at what the broad situation is. You're not willing to just take the easy answer, yes, down 15%, and be able to party with it. But then you really looked at the difficult conversations. So that's something that I find very admiring.
Yeah,
Yes,
So
thank
indeed.
you.
on that
Thank you. So I was just going to
so
say, I think when times are bad, it's always best to test your bottom line, plan for the worst, and hope for the best. And that's the message we
mm,
gave in our town halls. We did a lot of town halls. We normally do it once a quarter. We did it more often during that time, to tell people the reality. But I have a different approach when it comes to taking risks. When we want to take risk and launch a new product, to go after a customer, open a new country, I'm always very positive. I don't say worst case is going to be this if we go to Ethiopia. When we went to Ethiopia, I said best case is if we go to Ethiopia, this is what's going to happen. So I think you got to
yeah,
find an appropriate time to go best case and appropriate time to go worst case.
excellent point. I know that there is some innovation. You have been a very innovative company throughout, and there is some innovation that we should be hearing from. Do you care to share what's the future? What are you looking at currently?
You're
Sure.
right.
I we as you saw from the video, we make mainly men's clothing, some women. So it's the shirt I'm wearing now, it's the jacket I'm wearing now, it's trousers, pants. Um, Obviously, the shortage back in March, April timeframe were personal protective equipment, PPEs, as everyone says. And one of my
Mm,
team members said, I think we should go after this market. And I'm like, we've never done something like this. Okay, why don't you go ahead and go? Because we were talking about bankruptcies, forecast, cutting production capacity. Go ahead and run with it. So she
mm,
did. She went and looked at it. And then 4 weeks later, she came back and said, I think there's opportunity, but we're moving a little bit slow to capture that.
okay.
And that's when I
Yeah.
jumped in and said, okay, she really needed some help to pull the people together.
Mm,
Before I go to that, if you don't mind, you're talking about change. I think I'm very fortunate to have a very strong team, a very good team, because if this lady didn't come to me and say, let's do PPEs, I personally would not have thought it myself. I had too many other things to
mm,
worry about. And this is, I always believe when you have a really strong team that, as you said, has a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset, in time of crisis is when you need that. Is really thinking
mm,
differently, not like
mm,
frozen stuck, don't know what to do. And I think that's an asset everyone should have and think about. So back to the discussion on PPE. So we quickly said, okay, what's needed? Oh, we need to do disposable masks. Everyone's looking for disposable masks, but it's actually against our DNA in that we focus a lot on sustainability. We
ah,
started looking at wastewater treatment plants 25 years ago. We implemented the first one in our factory 25 years ago when no one cared about wastewater at that time. People were dumping
mm,
raw, untreated water into the rivers, and that was never us. And we're like, wow, the number of masks that you're going to wear every day is in billions that you're using across the world. And sometimes people use more than one mask a day.
mm,
And we said, let's come up with a mask, but let's make it washable. So the first thing is, don't be tempted to go with where the market was heading at that time, which was disposable masks. And
yep,
because
Right.
we felt that the way to create, we knew the technology to create disposable masks was buying machines. It's automated. You don't need a lot of human. Now, our factories, we have a lot of workers. We should utilize our extra capacity that we have during this downtime. We have workers. So why don't we actually sew a mask that fits people a lot better than the disposable mask that we've all been, experiencing when we had a cold before. In Asia, people wearing masks when you get sick, right? That was quite common. But it just wasn't that comfortable. So we said, why don't we do that? So number one, we said, okay, don't forget about disposable. Let's go to something reusable. And second thing is, let's learn about what is protection. What does protection mean in the case of a
mm,
virus? And you'll
mm,
be very surprised to hear that if you're wearing a reusable mask now, a washable mask, that most likely it does not protect you against virus. So what do I mean? What do I mean by that? It's a filter you need a filter to filter out the viruses. And most of the masks, if it has something called particle matter, PM 2.5, it was designed for road pollution. When you're bicycling, you don't want or you don't want the pollution coming into your lungs. So in Hong Kong, that's what people measure, PM 2.5 and PM 10. That's a roadside monitor. But you will be surprised to hear that viruses or bacteria is down to PM 0.1 to 0.3. So we said, okay, find a filter that filters out 0.1 to 0.3 micron. And we're like, okay, where could we find that? So we got the filter, but the problem is you wash it once or twice, it breaks down. So we came out over the next 2 months. I said, let's not be first to the market. Let's come up with the best mask we can do using our engineering expertise. We came up with a mask, 20 washes. This was back in about June. So we were selling masks to people, B2B, which is what we normally do, B2B business. And we were getting some traction, but not as much as we wanted. And at the same time, people are saying, 20 washes, how do I keep track 20 washes? I don't know how to keep track of it. So I was thinking, how do we do that? Do we use like an electric toothbrush where the color of the brush, fades so you know it's time to change it? And my team's like, we can't figure that out in such short a time. We don't have that. We're talking to chemical companies on how to do colors. And I challenged our R&D team, said, can we do more than 20 washes? Why is it after 20 washes it breaks down? What is the property? And I'm pleased to say that we're going to launch a 100 wash. You can machine wash and tumble dry, which is a lot harder than a mask. Most people hand wash. If you do hand wash, it's definitely more than 100 washes. So we have a mask that we're going to launch that is washable, has a 0.1 PM 0.1 filter, and you can wash it at least 100 times in the machine and tumble dry it, and the filter still works. And it's
we have the privilege of having it here.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you guys like the samples. So this is, as you can see, you can probably hear me still. It's a 3D.
Yeah.
It's a 3D shape, right? It covers the chain down here. It covers the sides very well, and it gives you enough breathing room so that your mouth isn't constantly touching the mask. You have room inside the mask. When you speak, it doesn't irritate your mouth. And again, we're
touch.
Yes.
I mean, it's very soft to touch. It's very comfortable, and like you were saying, there is quite a bit of space between when I speak and the fabric, which is very different from the other types of reusable masks that I've seen in the market. So, I mean, the minute I got it, Mei Wai and myself, we both have a sample from Roger, and the minute we put it on, we're like, we love it.
To wrap up, I think it'll be nice to summarize that the leaders and teams need to have that great sense of awareness and mindfulness in implementing organizational change, as you've seen with Roger Lee. We have shared earlier BART or BART framework to help you in considering your boundary, authority, role, and tasks so as to look deeper into organizational change and not just see it as a massive transformation exercise which is dreaded. Okay. However, we cannot be successful without understanding the behavioral change behind organizational change. And in fact, that becomes extremely important, particularly with leaders needing to be empathetic. And as a change leader myself, what resonates with me is that the saying that in order to modify someone else's behavior, I first have to understand and modify my own. And just to share with you, an Asian family-owned retailer who owned legacy department stores in a conglomerate business had already made many short-term changes, including shortening supply chains, being more efficient, and going on e-commerce. But somehow, no matter how many change discussions they go through, their model continues to stick broadly to the good old days when the iconic retail legacy brand flourished under the grandfather and granduncle that brought accessibility of brands from overseas to a one-stop shop experience. Now we know that these retailers, which are middlemen, it's becoming very challenging with consumers all being able to go direct to their brands. So it was until deeper psychodynamic analysis that we understood that, in fact, the owner found that the leadership team who were in the family felt guilt and shame towards their grandfather, the uh, founder of the retail outlet, and they felt they could not perform up to his mark, and they feared to make any changes that differed too drastically from his model. So, with that recognition from a leader's perspective, right down deep inside, these are barriers that we need to look to move forward sometimes in business. And lastly, very importantly, because we are Laura and here and I are here talking about change, and we've heard Roger Lee about TAL Group, we can listen to cases and everybody's different styles on change. However, we cannot just copy and take it, lift it off, because what we're seeing in real life is there are companies that are more changeable and those that are less changeable. So it's really important for you to take the process through yourself and implement that change. Because what we found are companies that tend to have more smoother workflow and connection in departments and have leaders with what we call a third pair of ears to listen beneath the surface. These are organizations that can make organizational change more successful. How about you, Laura?
Well, I mean, what I've heard from Roger is that, you know how when we look at psychodynamics of organizations, we say
Yes,
you listen to the heart.
right,
Sometimes it's not the data, it's not the statistics. Of course, those are all important, but then if you're able to speak to the heart or listen to your heart, very much like your third year concept, then chances of your success are much, much, much higher. Like in Roger's sharing, he said, you know, this is what we feel like we should be doing. That is our DNA, how driven his team is. This reminds me of a story back in the 1790s, late early 1800s, when you know how the Great Britain had too many prisoners to handle back in the UK. They had to ship them to Australia, right? And I still remember at
right,
the beginning they were saying that when they shipped the prisoners, the convicts from UK to Australia, there was a high number of death rate because of the poor sanitation and the very poor management of the ships. So that it was probably around a 12% death rate. But then when they aligned interests with the contractors or with the consultants saying, instead of us paying you when the convicts board the ship in the UK, we pay you when they land in Australia. And with this small change, but very fundamental, very aligned interest that speaks to the heart of the contractors, they're able to reduce the death rate to less than 0.5%. So from 12% to 0.5%, all because you're able to talk to the heart of the issue and not just with systems and with structures, but also with really tapping into what matters to that individual. So I think this has been an amazing, amazing discussion. And I loved your analogy of or your example of the family business that you just mentioned. Indeed, if you do not handle the heart, whatever manifests would still be rooted in you know in the core, meaning the heart or the feeling. So with that, I think we should thank our viewers today, because it has been a very rewarding journey.